Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, welcome to our new year.
New Year. Happy New Year, Dr. Paul. How are you?
That's right. And you know, we're in the business of promoting peace and prosperity. And that's our goal this year, too, as last year. And, well, there wasn't a world war going on, but there's a world agitation going on.
Yeah.
And but over the holiday weekend, over the New Year weekend, there was certainly a lot of talk. It looks like there are some neocons around who are still agitating. They sort of like war. One of the times I got another member of Congress so angry at me is that, when the Republicans were pushing, probably Iraq war or something, and I used the word warmonger, and this guy was, military, gotcha, neocon. Boy, he came up to me after, he said, "We are not warmongers." Well, I didn't enter into that argument about it. That's a semantic thing. But right now, you and I certainly have talked about the reason everybody should be concerned about the non-progress or regression that's going on in Iraq. The Iraq war was really ongoing, and that's been 14 years now, since 2003. So it's still there, and they're agitating. And I always argued the war wasn't really over, because the goal of the war was to make it peaceful, make it democratic, and make it pro-American. But the whole purpose of the war was just to solidify our empire and make sure Iraq was on our side of that. And that's what that embassy was so symbolic of.
Yeah.
At the time, I remember how upset I was about this symbolism of the biggest embassy in the world in a country that we took over. And to me, it was all this was a Far Eastern, maybe a worldwide headquarters for the CIA, and some of our special interests. But of course, over the weekend, the friction in Iraq has continued. It was bombing, of course, that we talked about before, and an American was killed. But now there's a lot of rhetoric going by, and I thought one description of this was pretty accurate. The people who were attempting to storm the embassy had to move back, or they choose to move back. But we, with our foreign policy, have alienated all the factions, the ones that were friendly with us and the ones that didn't like us, but they're unified, and which means that right now, our personnel in the embassy is almost like being held hostage. This might be a hostage worse than what Carter had to put up with, in Iran. But these people are there, and they just can't walk around now because there's a lot of danger. But the rhetoric is bad. The neocons, in some ways, started praising Trump. That scares me.
Yeah.
Oh, finally, he's going to get tough. And Trump, his language is always tough, and it's very authoritarian. That this will not go, unseen, and he will take care of this. And so there's a lot of threats there. And of course, and I'd like you to mention about this, it looks like the United States is moving troops in, and that's not a good sign at all. Instead, we should be closing the base and bringing our troops home. That would make me feel better if we want to enhance the move toward peace and prosperity in this particular year.
Yeah, exactly. And just to recap where we're coming from, back on Friday, there was a Katyusha rocket attack on an Iraqi military base where Americans, military and contractors are. I think one contractor was killed. There have been a number of these attacks on these facilities for quite some time. This time the U.S. responded. President Trump sent in F-15s to bomb 5 facilities, I think some in Syria and some in Iraq, to attack one of the militias, one of the PMU, paramilitary units, that it claims was responsible for the attack. Of course, once again, without any proof. Ironically, this group that they attacked had been on the front lines fighting ISIS for quite some time. And so that obviously irritated especially a lot of Shia in Iraq, who are the majority. They don't like ISIS very much because ISIS destroyed their country in 2014, if you remember. So here comes the U.S. attacking the guys that are fighting ISIS. I wonder if they're going to send a thank you note, if ISIS will. So this is what started it. The tensions, have been boiling over for probably 17 years almost since we've been there, boiled over. This group that supports the militia came in front of the embassy and they started protesting. They started breaking things. They even set, I think, the anteroom of the embassy on fire. They were there for about a day and a half or so, and then they pulled back. And of course, then Trump waded into it, saying the whole thing is Iran's fault. And you know the neocons are whispering in his ear. And sadly, he just laps it up. He just doesn't seem to care about the truth. Suddenly, everyone you don't like is Iranian backed. It used to be everyone I don't like is a Russian agent. So it's the simplistic. And here's what Trump said at the time: Iran killed an American contractor. Now Iran is orchestrating an attack on the embassy in Iraq. There will be held fully responsible. Not even Iranian backed. Iran clearly setting us up for an attack on Iran.
And how he's going to get out of this, who knows? It reminds me of the time Reagan had to get out of a similar situation, but I'll mention that a little bit later on. But one thing that aggravated this and expanded the problem is there is Pompeo coming down real hard on one of the top Iraqi members of parliament who was sort of representing the status quo, and yet Pompeo really came down and said, "Oh, you're nothing but an Iranian proxy," and they're probably friends, they're probably sympathetic, but to label this at this particular time, it's not exactly, you know, a good method of trying to solve this problem.
Yeah, no
and
kidding.
so the diplomacy doesn't seem to be working very well. And with the building up of the troops, you know, they said there 750 paratroopers are coming in, or maybe 4,000 more. But where they're going to go and exactly what they will do, I mean, we're starting to build again. I think Trump now has a record of actually adding more troops over there than even Obama.
Yeah.
You know, there was a gradual decrease, but the number of troops are actually going up there, and there's such a concerted effort. Just look at how many people came down hard on Trump when he wanted to bring a couple troops home from Syria. But the whole thing is, he's thinking, you know, election. People have told him, if you have a war going on there, you're not going to get reelected.
Yeah.
So, yes, but he's hearing also, if you look like a wimp, you're not going to get reelected, because that's what happened to Jimmy Carter. He looked like he wasn't strong enough, so he doesn't get elected. So when you operate from just hearing, you know, what the PR symptoms are and how the public is responding, and it's not based on a philosophy, you have no idea what's going to happen. That's why I think we're just sort of floating along with the foreign policy, and Trump, you know, we have given him credit when he does things the right way, but right now it seems like the pressure is tremendous for him not to back away, and he might not have much choice if we've pushed this situation where Trump may well be in a corner that it's going to be difficult for him. But the greatest fear for us, of course, is will it aggravate and expand the violence and become really, really bad where many, many troops have to go in. You know, I don't think Trump would do what Reagan did in 1983.
Yeah.
And that was the year we were invited in to try to settle a dispute in Lebanon, and 243 American military personnel were killed by a suicide bomber. And Reagan said, and I think this is fascinating history, because Reagan, when he went in there, and he said, the one thing I won't do is cut and run. He used those terms.
Yeah.
And when our personnel were killed, you know, it was within 3 months we were out of there completely and totally. And what's interesting is when Reagan wrote this incident up in his memoirs, he says, I remember, that's what I said. We wouldn't cut and run. But he says, it finally dawned on me that the politics of that region is a little bit crazy. And he said, and he even said, he says, you know what? If I hadn't sent those Marines in there in the first place, none of them would have been killed. Yeah. And this is the thing that goes on. But most people wouldn't think that that's what, at least on the neocons, just about everybody else in the Republican and Democrat, they'd be screaming and hollering like crazy if Trump said, I've had enough of this, we're getting out of there, because that's what he said he wanted to do. Why doesn't he stick to his own advice?
Well, of course, if he did that, Pompeo would say, he was just kidding, you know, we're going to stay. And it really makes me wonder if Pompeo was more dangerous than Bolton, because Bolton was so obvious in his crazy warmongering. Pompeo comes across, with something different. I think he's every bit the neocon that Bolton was, and I think he's more dangerous. And you mentioned this is very important. Pompeo, not Trump, Pompeo named Hadi al-Amiri a Iranian proxy. He is the top MP in parliament. He's the head of the Badr Brigade, and he's also head of the second largest bloc within the Iraqi parliament.
Yeah.
This guy is a major political player in Iraq, and Pompeo just, like a drunk in a bar, just throwing his fists around. This guy all of a sudden is Iranian proxy. And it's very, very dangerous. It was just weeks ago that the U.S. was praising the protesters in Iraq, saying they're fighting for their freedom. That's when they were attacking an Iranian consulate. But now when there's protesters that are protesting the Americans, they're all Iranians, they're all Iranians. And it's dangerous. And I think, we put up a piece by Caitlin Johnstone over the weekend. It was really interesting. And, and I think you can sort of blame this on the Hollywoodization of foreign policy. Everything is simplified down to black hats and white hats, good guys and bad guys. And so we have to remake the movie of 1979 because we didn't like the outcome the first time. So we're going to remake the Iranian takeover of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. We're going to remake it in a new way. It's no longer that wimp Carter in the office. It's going to be Trump, and Trump's going to go in there. He's not going to let it happen again. It really is like a Hollywood sequel. The problem is real life really isn't Hollywood, and this is not going to end the same way that they wish.
It's amazing that we're suspecting, and it's starting to show that there'll be strong support for us having a very, very strong stand, in Iraq. But in 2003, when they were getting ready to go in, it was all based on lies. A lot of people were killed. And finally, it turned into to be an unpopular war. Even Obama said it was a terrible war, but the good war is in Afghanistan, which makes no sense at all. But people have said, and that's been the conventional wisdom for all this time. They just said, well, this was a bad war, bad decision, too many people. Trump campaigned on it.
Yeah.
And he stood by his gun. But now, and as you used the metaphor, that he's trapped. He's trapped. Which way is he going to go? But in many ways, he's allowed himself to get trapped because he's neither a non-interventionist or a full-blooded neocon. Neither one. So that is the predictable outcome. They're going to get in the middle of trying to satisfy everybody and not basing their decision on a firm principle.
And the whole thing is myth building because they're trying to push the myth that everyone who is against us in Iraq is just Iranian. They're bad Iranians. But there's this mythical group of Iraqis who still are just dying to throw flowers at us like the neocons promised. And the whole thing is a complete lie. And here's where we are now. The protesters have withdrawn from the embassy and they claim a psychological victory. And I would say that's absolutely correct because what they've done is they've made it obvious. Suddenly it's now obvious that the U.S. has no friends in Iraq. Nobody wants us there. Mahdi, the resigned prime minister, who's still an office holder or caretaker. Sistani, the head of the religious head. The president of Iraq. The people protesting. Nobody wants the U.S. there. They're all seething with resentment. And the thing we should ask ourselves, our inability to see others the way, to see ourselves objectively, can you blame them? 17 years ago, based on lies, their country was destroyed. It's now full of depleted uranium. They have birth defects. They have, 1 million people were killed. And somehow we're supposed to be surprised that they're seething with resentment and would love to see the U.S. leave. What this did is it just exposed it. There is no support for the U.S. there. In fact, the State Department is left sort of whining about the fact that the Iraqis didn't come to our help. Here's a spokesman quoted in Politico. It's moments like this when you see people's true colors. They were upset because the Iraqis only sent a few troops to protect the embassy.
They're arguing right now over some technical and strategic factors, but I think we get into these troubles because they do not justify what they do. And that means our leaders in this country, for as long as I can remember, who orchestrate the foreign policy, and they do not have a moral justification for it. There was no moral justification for deciding that we had to save the world, take over Iraq, because there was a bad guy there. But there's been bad guys in a lot of places. There've been in China that we sort of, have decided not to engage in an outright war so far. In the same way with Russia. But this whole thing is there is no justification for any of these wars. No moral justification. They don't follow the law. They don't go through with the Constitution of having a declared war. And then they wonder why they get into trouble. Then you have two factions there, and not instead of accepting the fact that you could have a foreign policy of peace and always work for that, or you say, well, this is a war and we have to fight it for our national security, because it would be a lie. And that's what they've discovered. It's all based on a lie. There was no need for national security. Oh, it's our interest, national interest, to take care of it. It's like in Syria.
Yeah.
We're there because it's our oil. We still have the oil. We have to keep our oil. And there's a few people that haven't conceded that argument too.
Yeah. Remember that great article from Pat Buchanan, Whose War? Who's the interest? But we talk about him being in a trap, and we use that word, with a lot of forethought, because it is a trap. And you see already Elizabeth Warren and some of the other Democratic contenders are saying, hey, Trump, this is a big mess. You walked right into it by walking away from the Iran deal, which was working just fine. You set this whole thing up. The neocons don't care if Trump goes down in 2020. They'd be just as happy with anyone else. So it's a trap. He can't win if he goes in or if he doesn't go in. But here's a funny thing. I'll just close with this. Saddam Hussein, he was a secularist. He dealt very harshly with Sunni and Shia extremists. We might not have liked those techniques, but look at where we are now. Just like in Libya, we're in a situation where if we had left these guys in power, we'd have a few trillion more dollars. There'd be a few million less dead people, a few thousand less dead Americans. But would it really have been very different if we had just left them all alone? This is the question we need to ask. And also the final thing is, be careful of the war propaganda. Iranian proxies, Iranians, these are Iraqis in Iraq who don't want the U.S. there. We should listen to them.
Very good. My only advice to the administration and to our president is take your own advice, because we've heard good advice coming from the president when he was campaigning for the office, and he's giving good advice to himself when he said, I don't want war. He's even said it under these circumstances. He doesn't want war. But then he gets into a box like this because there's the two sides arguing one versus the other. But the information is there. They have to wake up and see that there's a position that you can take, that you're not un-American because you want to avoid fighting a war that's unconstitutional, doesn't make any sense. It's costing us, a lot of money and participating in our economic disasters with our deficit. So it's a shame that the logic doesn't prevail. And at the same time, there are others gearing up for this, because this event, what's going on in Iraq, is going to be costly. It's going to go up, and it's going to add to the problem of what's happening financially around the world. At the same time, there's a lot of agitation for having another reserve currency. Iran is involved, and that means Iraq can be involved. China's involved, and Russia's involved. And even back in 2003, it was talked about that one of the things that Saddam Hussein wanted was to get out of the dollar market, and that's an attack on the empire. You have to have a dollar hegemony in order to pursue the total control in a world government like this. So that is what's going on right now, and we're participating in that. And the answers aren't complex. The advice is let's hold the president to his statement he's made. Let's just get out of these places. We don't need these wars. These wars don't make any sense. So we've heard some good advice coming from the administration and others, but unfortunately the real noise comes from the neocons who control the voice box, and that is the media, because war drums have made it so that if you don't agree, you're some sort of evil anti-American, and we have to counteract this. I happen to think that the people that really agree with us are growing in numbers, and they don't feel guilty about defending peace and prosperity. So we will do our very best in the coming year, as we always will, to work for peace and prosperity as we know it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.